It began not with a bang, but with a notification, a soft digital chime that echoed in the pristine silence of 4 Alderwood Lane, a sound that would become the soundtrack to my unraveling. My name is Arthur Brandt, and for 47 years I believed I understood the rules of civilized society. But that was before I learned that in the gilded cage of the Oaks, even the most fundamental involuntary act of life could be legislated, monitored, and fined. They cited me for breathing wrong. The Oaks was the kind of place people aspired to, a picture-perfect collection of Georgian colonials and manicured lawns that felt less like a neighborhood and more like a beautifully rendered simulation of one. The streets, named after trees that had been cleared to build them, were so quiet you could hear the whisper of the automated sprinkler systems coming on at dawn. The HOA, presided over by the impeccably cold Eleanor Vance, wasn't just a board. It was a sovereign state. Its constitution was a 150-page covenant, its commandments delivered through the Oakslife app, a sleek, insidious piece of software that was our sole portal for complaints, payments, and, inevitably, penalties. It was through this app that I received my first violation. The subject line was innocuous. CCV 7.89, Audible Biological Disruption. The description was not. It stated that on Tuesday at 3:14 p.m., I had been recorded on a public right-of-way producing repetitive, grating, and unnecessarily loud respiratory expulsions consistent with aggressive throat clearing in violation of Community Code of Conduct, Section 12, Audible Nuisances. I laughed, a short, bitter sound I immediately worried was too loud. I had been walking back from the mailbox, yes, and a pollen cluster had irritated my throat. I had cleared it. Once. The fine was $75. My first call to the HOA office was met with the placid, rehearsed tone of Eleanor's assistant. "The citation is not about the act itself, Mr. Brandt," she explained as if to a child. "It's about the audible nature of the act. We have standards for ambient sound to protect the tranquil character of the Oaks." I paid the fine, chalking it up to a bizarre, one-off overreach. I was wrong. It was a test. The citations that followed were a descent into a special kind of suburban madness, a non-conforming gait, fine, citing my irregular and heavy-footed walk as potentially disturbing to the visual and auditory harmony of the morning sidewalk, a prolonged exhalation penalty issued after a security camera, one of the many small dark orbs that dotted the streetlights, caught me sighing in frustration while untangling my garden hose. The fines escalated, from $75 to $200, then $500. The Oakslife app became a source of palpable dread, its cheerful green icon a portal to an inescapable panopticon. My wife, Sarah, started flinching every time my phone chimed. "Just breathe quieter, Arthur," she'd plead, her own voice a nervous whisper. "Don't give them a reason." I wasn't the only one. The neighborhood was a pressure cooker of silent resentment. Conversations at the quarterly HOA meetings held in the sterile community clubhouse were masterclasses in passive-aggressive terror. Homeowners would stand, their voices trembling, not with anger, but with the fear of their next violation. They would plead about misplaced garbage can lids, about a single dandelion daring to bloom, about the off-white hue of their paint being a half-shade too ecru. Eleanor Vance sat at the head of the table, a silver-haired sphinx in a Talbot's twin set, her smile a thin, non-negotiable line. She never raised her voice. She simply referred to the covenants, her words as final as a judge's gavel. Dissent was not just discouraged, it was financially catastrophic. I decided to run for the board. It was a naive notion, a belief that the system could be fought from within. My campaign consisted of timidly handing out flyers about common-sense governance. My opponent, a man named Robert Hill, who had never received a fine in his life, was endorsed by Eleanor. The election was a sham. The ballots were counted by a private firm hired by the HOA, and I lost in a landslide. The next day, I received a new violation: unauthorized political solicitation for the flyers. The fine was $1,000. It was a message, clear and brutal: resistance is futile. The true horror, however, was yet to be uncovered. Driven to the brink, I started digging. Late nights fueled by cheap whiskey and simmering rage, I cross-referenced property records, HOA financial statements, which were deliberately opaque, and the minutes from board meetings going back a decade. A pattern emerged, a ghost in the machine. The most aggressive fines, the most esoteric violations, were overwhelmingly concentrated on a specific cluster of homes on the older west side of the neighborhood. Homes like mine, built on slightly larger lots with mature oak trees that Eleanor and her inner circle coveted. I found a record of a quiet, failed lawsuit from a family that had been driven into foreclosure by a relentless barrage of violations years prior. Their home was purchased for a song by a shell corporation I could barely trace, only to be sold 6 months later to a close friend of Eleanor's nephew at a massive profit. This wasn't about tranquility. It was a land grab, a sophisticated, legalistic scam designed to harass homeowners into financial distress or emotional exhaustion, forcing them to sell their valuable properties under market value. The Oaks Life app, the cameras, the Byzantine rules. They were the weapons. The fines were the pressure. And Eleanor Vance was the architect, weeding out those who didn't fit her perfect, profitable vision, one involuntary breath at a time. The final confrontation happened in her office. I slammed my printed evidence on her desk, my voice shaking with a fury I could no longer contain. "I know what you're doing," I hissed. "The targeted fines, the forced sales, it's corruption, it's theft." Eleanor didn't flinch. She looked at the papers, then at me, with an expression of profound, almost bored disappointment. "Arthur," she said, her voice as calm as a frozen lake, "your property value has increased by 40% since you moved in, thanks to the standards we enforce. You are benefiting from the very system you decry." She leaned forward, her eyes devoid of any warmth. "But you're correct about one thing. You are a disruption. Your respiratory issues are the least of your offenses. Your inability to assimilate is the real problem. We have a community to protect." I was served with papers the following week. The HOA was suing me for non-payment of fines, legal fees, and for creating a hostile living environment. The total was more than my mortgage for a year. My lawyer, a weary man who specialized in these kinds of disputes, was blunt. "They have deeper pockets, Arthur. They'll bleed you dry. They always do." I lost the house. The legal battle exhausted our savings and my spirit. Sarah left, the constant stress finally shattering the foundation of our 30-year marriage. On the day I moved out, carrying the last box to my rented truck, the neighborhood was as quiet as ever. The lawns were perfect. The streets were clean. Not a leaf was out of place. As I stood on the sidewalk, a broken man in a broken life, I saw Eleanor Vance across the street. She was standing on her immaculate porch holding a small tablet, the Oaks Life interface glowing softly in the shade. She didn't look triumphant. She looked efficient. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind that comes before a sob, a final, ragged exhalation of grief and defeat. And as I did, my phone, still in my pocket, chimed softly. I didn't need to look to know what it was. Another citation. The last one. The ultimate logical conclusion of their perfect, silent world. They had cited me for breathing wrong. One last time.